Hey, CNFers, any people in and around Bend, Oregon on Sunday, October 19th? Anyone? Anyone? I'll be at Dudley's Bookshop and Cafe from 1 to 2:30, doing a little lecture, doing a little Q&A, signing a little book called The Front Runner, and if you're in Eugene on Sunday, October 26th, the fourth and final live podcast recording of 2025 will be taking place at Gratitude Brewing, 1 p.m. We started something special with these live podcasts. We're going to keep them coming, baby. Also, call for submissions for the next issue of the audio magazine is up. The theme is codes. For more information and submission guidelines, visit brendanamaro.com. Hey, it's the top pinned thing on my homepage.
And let the you just be the you that motivates the perspective rather than the you that narrates the perspective. That's where the power of personal writing, I think, really comes in.
All right, CNFers, it's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell, the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara, punk-ass bitch of CNF. This is the first CNF pod after Mark Maron sunsetted WTF, which has really bummed me out this week, not gonna lie. I've had friends and peers compare CNF pod to WTF, and by extension, compare me to him, and I take this as a compliment. I never sought to rip off Mark. I'd be just as grouchy, bitter, and resentful had I never heard of him. I applaud him for walking away at the height of his powers, so he can find meaning in other work. I hope he keeps up his weekly newsletter just so we can be a passenger to his thinking week to week. It's always been fun. The monologues were always one of my favorite things about his podcast. I don't know when I'll sunset CNF pod, but it's going to be a long, long time. Sorry to disappoint. Today we have Peter Rubin. He is head of publishing at Automattic, where he works primarily with Longreads.com, but also helps out his pals at the sister magazine, the Atavist Magazine. You might have heard of it. He's on the pod today to talk about a lot of things, but he's also drumming up attention for a membership drive for Longreads.com, a hub of curation for the best long reads on the web. First, started by Mark Armstrong, he of a few episodes ago on this podcast. Longreads has since gone on to publish original works of criticism and journalism and personal essays, and they won a National Magazine Award for Best Digital Illustration in 2020. Yeah. In conjunction with Oregon Public Broadcasting, they produced Bundyville, the hit podcast that made Leah Satilli something of a household name. Shout out to her new season of Hush. More about Peter in a second, okay? Be patient, you mongrels, you insatiable monsters. Show notes to this episode and more at brendanamaro.com. Hey, there. You can peruse for hot blogs and sign up for my two very important newsletters, the flagship, Rage Against the Algorithm, and Pitch Club. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com. Also, if you care to support the podcast with a few dollar bills, y'all, visit patreon.com/CNFpod. There are some rad perks, but most are just happy to throw a few bucks into the guitar case. Okay, so a little more about Peter. He spent many years at Wired Magazine, and he's also the author of Future Presence, How Virtual Reality is Changing Human Connection, Intimacy, and the Limits of Ordinary Life, which came out in 2018. But with Chat GPT going full porn for verified adult users, what could possibly go wrong? Peter's book seems oddly of the moment. Also, it's only 7 years old. But I guess in tech, that's like a stone age ago. You can learn more about Peter from his very stripped-down website, ptrrbn.com. Yeah, he hates vowels. Don't come at him with vowels. Or you can follow him on the gram, at Proven Self. In this conversation, we talk about finding diamonds in the rough, how he cultivated his editor eye, being merciless in the edit, figuring out the identity of Longreads when he took over in 2021, curation, and the Longreads membership drive. Visit longreads.com to read more and to pony up. That's what I'm going to do. For you people who think I get handouts, just know that I'm not that savvy. Parting shot on my week in Idaho and sleeping in and on top of my car and the power of friends. But for now, here's my new best friend, Peter Rubin. Huh.
But when that's on my plate, then it's the fear of the deadline.
I work backwards from deadlines.
It's not fucking personal, but it feels so personal.
I am effing done.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
I grew up in Indiana, lit out for different pastures as soon as I could, which was college. And I left college having no real idea of what to do. I hated creative writing when I was growing up. I wrote by assignment only. And then my first year out of college, I was working at a think tank in Washington, D.C. And I remember being on a flight, maybe flight to visit my family, and I grabbed an issue of Esquire, and this was David Granger's Esquire. That was the lightning bolt. And it was almost immediate. I was like, that's what I want to do. It's reading Mike Sager and Tom Junod and like the murderer's row that was there. But even beyond the features, the magazine as a form, I grew up reading magazines, but not thinking about them. And Esquire, that moment was the first time I remember like thinking about a magazine as a work unto itself and what the front of the book was and what its function was. And so I was living in DC and I knew I was going to go to New York because that's where all my friends were. And now I had a real reason, right?
Yeah.
So I ended up going to grad school for journalism. I had no idea. I didn't see that. I didn't see it growing up. I didn't see it in college. No kids that I went to school with went into media or journalism. There was like one that I had heard of, but I didn't know him. So I just didn't know what that world looked like. So I got some grounding in the basics. I hated news reporting and I knew that wasn't me. And I always knew that I wanted to like go magazines and go culture writing specifically. So I ended up getting a freelance fact checking gig at GQ. That was the foot in the door. So, you hang around and you wait for an assistant to screw up. And, you wait for your chance to like redo some deep captions or whatever it is. And one little bit leads to one more little bit. And this was the end of Art Cooper's tenure, right? So another legendary editor. So like when I envisioned working in magazines, it was David Granger's Esquire, but somehow through just like a bizarre stroke of fortune, I found myself at Art Cooper's GQ and the writers who were there. I mean, it was Lucy Kalin and Brandon Holly and Michael Haney, and that was in-house. Devin Friedman, Adam Sachs. These were the people that I learned from, and I over the period of a few months, I ended up jumping out of fact checking over to the editorial side as assistant editor, and then became a staff writer. And at the time, this was everything that I thought I ever wanted. Your first magazine job to turn into that. So it was, I wanted to write about any and everything. And then as my career went on, it became more cultural than anything else, which was like the original goal. So I went and I wrote around, after I left GQ, you could have a thriving freelance career writing. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then I missed people. And so I ended up going to Complex and then to Wired. So in 2011, Wired's culture editor left, and they were looking for someone. And so that I ended up getting that, which took me from New York to California. And I spent almost a decade at Wired and had an absolutely incredible time. And so that is when my your writerly remit expands, right? So, I should also say that I started as a writer, but you very quickly become an editor also. You're steeped in it. And this was a time when the culture of mentorship was sort of baked into magazines. So whether it's you're writing a cover profile and you're down the hall from the editor, you see how they work on it. This is not an email relationship. You are, you are there and you really soak in the DNA of magazine making and feature editing and feature writing. So you internalize the sort of structural beats in a way that are so difficult to do from outside. Just the good fortune of being like right at the end of the like glitzier Conde era. Like I saw the town cars and I saw the editors getting into their, getting into their fancy places. And I was nowhere near there, but I saw it. But that was also a time when magazine journalism started to contract in a really fundamental way. And being at Wired, it brought me more into the doing more tech journalism, obviously, always suffused with what it meant for culture and what it meant for larger ideas. And then I left Wired to help a friend launch a publication at Medium, and this was Medium's like last final push as a kind of separate editorial publisher. They launched a bunch of titles in the like 2019 time. So and then a little pandemic came around and that changed some things. And so I ended up coming to Automattic, to Longreads and the Atavist in 2021. And journalism for me has always been about curiosity more than topic. And so I love any place that thinks deeply about journalism and storytelling. And so both those titles have such a storied history and tradition of long form journalism that it's been a real joy being there.
Yeah, I love when you said that you hated creative writing at one point, and I'll never forget. I tried taking in college. I tried taking like a creative writing class. I would probably love and nerd out on it now, but at the time, the instructor, we were looking at like the first sentence or two of Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway, and like the first sentence, it like ended with fish, and the second sentence began with in, and we spent like way too much time like the fish, and it would be like in, so like it was gonna catch it. It was that degree of really nerdy bridging of sentences. I'm like, I just want to write cool stories. This is a little bit too deep for me, and I ended up withdrawing from the class. But I think now I would really like it. But at that time, I was like, this is bullshit.
Yeah, and I've always envied those people who claim any sort of like inborn need to write, right? Because that sort of motivating energy propels you through your life, and you're always, you find the joy in the creative urge, and that is something that's emerged over time for me, but it was nowhere. Like I liked writing poems, and I still am, but I was super into hip hop when I was a kid, and so like rap was that was what I wanted to write. And so the idea of expressing your thoughts through writing wasn't completely anathema to me, but the idea of sitting down and writing a story felt like you're asking me to do something that is just not in my DNA. But you have to be exposed to the thing that lights you up, and there are so many flavors of creative writing and creative nonfiction that once for a lot of people, myself included, it's you just have to see that thing, find that thing, and that's the thing that you connect with.
Yeah, and David Granger's Esquire was that kind of turn that world from black and white into color for you. And I love what you said about the mentorship being kind of baked into these places where you worked. And what was that experience like of, being able to suddenly see things that you weren't seeing before because you were exposed to a new kind of vernacular?
I mean, the thing that I remember so much is those books, and those two books in particular, these were like the men's books. And so I want to try to wrest the free of any sort of gendered language in talking about this, because every magazine had this, and that is the idea of a house tone and a house voice, and what is like, who is the we. But those books in particular wrote with an authority that bordered on swagger. And it was before the word swag was ever being used, but the idea that a book like that was seen as aspirational. People read GQ and Esquire in part because they wanted to level up. Maybe it was their personal style. Maybe it was the stories that they were exposed to. But the thing that was really inculcated in me was the importance of being able to embody that house tone, while not sacrificing your personal writing voice to it. Obviously, everybody who has written at a book like that, you've had people like John Jeremiah Sullivan and Matt Teague and Chris Heath and Elizabeth Gilbert and all these legendary people go through those titles, and they became who they were, and they had this indelible voice that didn't go anywhere, but it was sort of in concert with a magazine that knew what it was and knew what it was to people. And the sort of seisms, the the upheaval that magazines have gone through, I think that's one of the things that's fallen by the wayside, is the idea of the DNA of a magazine, and that writers often find themselves feeling like they are writers who then need to connect with a magazine, but it's not it's not as much a sort of pool. Like, these magazines were talent pools. And I grew up reading Mad Magazine, and you had the usual gang of idiots. It was the same people contributing. The satire and the spoofs were always different, but you had that feeling in a lot of magazines for a very, very long time, and you still have it today at the Atlantic and New Yorker and places like that. But I think it's those places that have a print history that have managed to retain that. I think the few places that you see that now are in the like cooperative model, the defectors and the 404s, where it's owned by the journalists, and these are the journalists that you read and love day in and day out.
Yeah, there's something to be said like when you would get one of those magazines, and if you started to have a connection with the writers, like with the New Yorker, the first thing I look at is the table of contents, because I'm like, all right, who are my favorite starters in the lineup? Are they starting this week?
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, cool. Like, there's Nick Baumgarten. I know I'm in for this kind of ride. And here's Lauren Collins. I know there's going to be something from Paris or something in that story. And it's like, oh, cool. Like, I like this lineup this week. And then maybe there's someone I haven't heard of. I'm like, okay, whenever I may get a chance to open this and actually read it, because let's face it, those things just pile up to the sky, and you don't read them, and you feel all guilty that you're not reading them. but the fact is, it's like, yeah, to your point, you start having a connection with those readers in that lineup and what they're bringing to it, and you're like, okay, yeah, cool. Like this feels like my crew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And there's so few magazines that I think have been able to maintain that kind of feeling. And the New Yorker has been obviously the New Yorker is going to do it well, but they've done a really nice job of evolving so that they have, even the folks who are maybe not in the building, they do a really good job of bringing in names that you just love reading, whether it's Gia Tolentino, and they've got Hanif Abdurraqib now. And so, like, your favorite critics, and they've managed to feel like a reflection of a different generation, which was always the knock on the New Yorker, as it felt just sort of rarefied and older, but they are more vital in some really surprising ways than the younger me would have ever given them credit for being.
Yeah. So you're coming up in magazines, and then when it was maybe not at a peak but still going strong, and then you're in the thick of it as you're still trying to get traction yourself as things start to contract. Like, so how are you metabolizing what was going on around you and looking out into the landscape and thinking, oh my God, like where do I fit into this now?
I'm going to say this word so many times in the course of this conversation. I was so incredibly fortunate to, when the winds really got tough, I was lucky enough to be somewhere and to be on staff somewhere, which was, going through the recession / media apocalypse of 2008. And you saw title after title after title fold, and friend after friend after friend after acquaintance, losing journalism jobs. That was, I was at Complex when that happened. And that was the first title, that was the first magazine where I worked where it actually very mindfully evolved from being print to a print digital hybrid. When I was at GQ, and this is in the early aughts, Condé Nast magazines didn't have their own web titles. There was style.com, there was Epicurious, and I think there was probably a third one, but like there was no GQ.com. There was style.com. And just people didn't consume journalism at the time the way online, the way they did. And so at Complex was the first time that I and everybody else on staff, I was executive editor there, we all became web editors too. And we all started thinking in different story forms. And thankfully I had a real grounding in putting together a front of book sections, right? So you're thinking bitsier, and it's almost like roundups and listicles before they were called roundups and listicles. So we had a feature well. I was editing, reported work and profiles and Q&As and all that stuff. But at the same time, we were learning what people read online. And without that, there wasn't a staffed up journalist who was able to opt out of that evolution process. So then when I went to Wired, interestingly enough, they had a print staff and they had a digital staff. Now, this was the place that had like invented the banner ad, right? Yeah. So like they knew digital presentation, and they knew what online media could be. Yet they had two different groups of people separated. It was the same floor, but there was a door you would walk out of the print side, you'd go down the hallway, you'd scan your card, and you'd go into the digital side, and they called it the Berlin Hall. And it made no sense. So at some point, the online culture editor wanted to go back to writing, and the culture section needed an editor. So I went to them and I was like, look, I'm editing for the Well, and I'm putting together this front of book section. What if I just took over the culture section? And they were like, why haven't we done this? So like that sort of grounding in being hybrid, print and online, served me really well, because then the Berlin Hall started to finally dissolve. And I'm not saying that I did that. What I'm saying is it was the beginning of a lot of people becoming hybrid. So it's such a rarity now to find anybody who works solely in print for any magazine. But it was a sort of long history of being in the right place at the right time and adding that one twist to the thing you do that helps you stay abreast of what the shifts are.
Yeah. And when you were doing, let's say, more reporting and writing, I hear like down there, I just have classic reporter notebook down here where I scribble little notes in. I always love getting a sense of how people gather their information, but, I'm always putting a pin in notes and stuff. Yeah. Just when you were reporting and writing stories, and even today when you step out to do that kind of work, how do you equip yourself for reporting?
It's really dependent on and still does depend on the situation. If I'm a fly on the wall, then it's a notebook. Mm-hmm. Especially if I can be somewhere unobtrusive, right? If my subject is doing something and I'm not with them, I want to capture everything that I'm thinking about them and the way they carry themselves, speech pattern stuff, whatever it is. If I'm spending time with somebody, it was probably always a little foolhardy, but I always depended on the recorder. Yeah. Because you just put it down and it recedes, and then it's you and the person. And then those conversations, I've just never felt comfortable taking notes while I'm talking to someone. It reminds them that they are being surveilled, right? It reminds them that the things they say and do are being noted, and it puts up a little bit of a layer there between the two of you. And I don't think it's an inhibitor for everybody. I found that it was for me. Yeah. And so I was always sort of dual mode. If I was like sitting somewhere, I'd do it notes. I might have a recorder going in case something happened, but the recorder was really for those just the intimate moments of talking to folks.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I love talking to people about like notebook versus recorder, and that ain't over the years. There are some people who they like having the notebook out too, because that in and of itself is kind of a reminder that yes, things are being taken down, and like don't get too comfortable, because we are in fact reporters, and so there's that. If it's out, it's a reminder of work being done and things are being recorded, because some people can get a little too comfortable. I've been in situations like that where some people are like they got a bit too loose, and then when I would talk back to them or in a certain, this is a long time ago, but he was just like, oh, whoa, brother, I had no idea that was on the records.
Right.
Like, you really got to take that out.
Yeah.
It was kind of a book project that never came to be, but it was just one of those deals. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's like, I got to make sure I'm very forthright with these tools to kind of protect them from themselves, in the idea of, in fairness and accuracy. It depends on the source, of course.
Right.
This guy was like a horse trainer, media savvy, but not like a politician or something where you'd be like, no, like, fuck you guys. Everything you say is on the record.
And you're right. The sort of the counter argument there is to do it that way and put the recorder down and let it recede. It requires a little bit of source education, right? You need to be very upfront. Be like, everything we talk about from here on out is presumed to be on the record, because you got to lay the ground rules. Because how many times have you been interviewing someone and they've said something and then say, oh, that last part was off the record?
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, that's not the way that it works. But if a person doesn't know that, then you're playing on, it's an uneven playing field. So it is always, and also shout out to the TP7 Olympus micro cassette recorder adapter, which was that little earbud you could put in and make a phone call and have everything get recorded. That was the mainstay for so long for me, because like obviously in-person reporting, there's nothing like it, but you're also doing a ton of phone work. All your secondaries are going to be phone. And that was such a, in the analog days, and even, after smartphones came around, it was just the what's the one tool a working journalist has to have, and it was that.
Yeah. So I love getting a sense of the editor's eye too, and in the little blurbs I used to send over to you guys, just little like just little podcast excerpts, just how even those little intros, which are only like a couple hundred words, seeing how like you or Krista or someone else would mark that up, I was like, wow, even in this like little 250 word blurb, like this thing is like really cut apart. And I love seeing that, because I'm like, oh, I'm seeing what the editors are seeing, which helps me become a better writer. So like, just when did you start to see things with that editorial eye that like a lot of writers just, it doesn't come natural for them?
Yeah. I mean, again, use the word fortunate. That was always there from the beginning. And I think that as a writer, my career built from the caption up. And the shorter a piece of writing is, the more the economy and clarity and punch of it matters. So when I'm writing 15 words and it needs to feel like it does something, you are trained and you eventually internalize the absolutely maximum impact per square inch of type. And what's interesting coming from that background is that once you get into long form features, and folks who have been writing sort of exclusively long form features, there's so much more play. And you can't apply that same economy thinking to long form writing that you would to a caption or a front of book item. But shout out to all the Longreads editors. You mentioned Krista Stevens, but Kristen, Sherry, and Carolyn, and now Brendan as well. They are all, when we put together, we do this top 5 newsletter every week, and it has little magazine elements. There's little bullet points at the top with tiny little distillations of what each pick is, and then you write an intro to the newsletter, and there's a larger blurb for these editors' picks that Longreads does alongside its original journalism, and you're workshopping them together. So whether it's 4 words and how do we get the maximum impact to these 4 words, to what can you do with 200 words, to what can you do with a 5,000 word feature that you're editing, I think that working at at that variable metabolism is so important, because each, whether you want to call it like an atom and a molecule and a I don't know, a sentient or a sentient being, it each builds on the previous ones, but also a long form feature writer can learn lessons from writing captions, and a caption writer can learn lessons from writing a long form feature. None of these things are hermetically sealed environments, and there are rules that for one that don't apply to the other. But I found that when I work with folks who came out of a magazine background, they too sort of built their writing or their editorial eye in this very Lego way. You start with these bricks, and then before long, you're editing the Millennium Falcon, and it's a damn sight different from having, like, I don't know, a little car and a minifig in it, but it does something magical.
For sure. And when you get to Longreads, what was the state of Longreads when you got there in 2021? And, how did you feel like you wanted to steward that ship?
Yeah, Longreads was in a really interesting place. They'd had a lot of success before the pandemic. They'd won a national magazine award, if I'm not mistaken. They had released an incredible podcast called Bundyville in conjunction with Oregon Public Radio, and then during in 2020, like so many places did, they had a bit of a sort of contraction, and so they was running very lean when I came around. But it also had two kind of incredible things. One is that it had a staff who had been there for a long time and really lived and breathed it, and really believed in its mission, which was to share the best long form storytelling on the web. And Longreads also enjoyed like a really incredible amount of goodwill among writers, among journalists, because you amplify good journalism. Those journalists who you amplify, it's always like, oh, and at the time long form was around too, so like, can I get a shout out from long form or from Longreads? And so when I came in, I didn't come in and say, I think we need to grow aggressively. I said, let's figure out who we are. Let's figure out what other people aren't doing that we do and that we can do better. And so the only real thing that changed when I first came in was to try to make the editors known quantities, not meaning like make them influencers like people are doing now.
Yeah.
But it was, let's start signing the things that we do. Let's make these editors' picks feel like they are written by somebody with a curatorial palette. The editors were always getting credited at the bottom of the original stories that we would assign and edit and publish. But the curation side of Longreads, that recommendation side, was sort of a black box. We sort of developed that. And so those editors' picks became more and more robust. And so it used to be like when I started in 2021, I'd say this is the biggest change. You would see an editor's pick and it would be the title of the article and the deck from the article, and then a link to the article. And now there's a little blurb, there's a pull quote. We do a little like module of other picks that we've done on a similar topic, because we want each of those editors' picks to feel like a valuable piece of, as much as we all hate this word, a valuable piece of content. It's the starting point. And so each of the editors has their own sensibility. Some people go to stories about nature and conservation. Some people go to politics. Some people go to subcultures and obsessions. But you put all those things together, and what you find is, and what I like to think is, Longreads, at least as a curator of the rest of the web and of long-form journalism on the web, gives this really well-rounded, varied diet. And not just that, but publications that range from the smallest of the small to the largest of the large. There's a lot of places that round up great stories for you to read. And too often And this isn't like any one entity, but you just see a lot of the Atlantic and the Times and the New Yorker and the Times Magazine. And of course, these are really like well-funded places that do incredible journalism, and we recommend those stories too. But we also like the editors at Longreads really value finding the brand new publications, the emerging publications, the literary journals that don't have a ton of readership, that haven't optimized their website so you can't like find their stuff elsewhere. But really digging and trying to find those stories that feel like they're something that you might not have seen otherwise. And it's always gratifying when we pick something and then you see other places start to pick it too.
Yeah.
And it's like we've seen that long reads can be the fuse for like a larger bit of attention that a piece might not have gotten otherwise.
How do you find those diamonds in the rough, those diamond publications out there?
Every time a new publication launches, as soon as one of us gets wind of it, we share it with the others, and everyone on Longreads has their own method. Some, some people have just a giant one tab of like dozens and dozens and dozens of places, and like every week they'll just methodically go through them. I use something called Readwise. Readwise, which is like a sort of a highlighting app, for lack of a better term. It has a reader. And so that can function as an RSS reader, but you can also use all kinds of filters and stuff. And you can create RSS feeds for places that don't have them. So I've sort of got this weird Frankensteinian way of trying to keep tabs on things. And so every day when I go through, I'm hopefully seeing a bunch of places that aren't on most people's reading journey. But like, we just have to pay a lot of attention to who's doing what. When something launches, make sure you add that to the rotation. We want to make sure we're not leaving anybody out in those sweeps.
Yeah, that's what I love about as more of a sports writer, and you trying to find places to pitch stories. Like, sure, the main book has where those are published, but then in the back are dozens upon dozens and dozens of the notable selections, which have a lot of obscure publications that are doing the kind of work that you would want anthologized. And that's always been my goal. I just want to be doing the kind of work that typically gets anthologized. If I ever get anthologized, cool, that's great and nice little feather in the cap. But I just want to do that kind of work. But yeah, you'll see like N+1 and a lot of other just things that you never heard of. Like, oh, cool. The fact that they're in here means they're open to that kind of work, and it broadens your reading palette and your pitching palette. So yeah, it's just that curatorial nature, and finding all these other little places is so important to the ecosystem at large.
Yeah. And I have to say, one of the most impressive feats of that sort of anthology curation that I've seen recently, I already mentioned Hanif Abdurraqib. Maybe he's on my mind because he's in the midst of a series he's writing of essays for Longreads, but he did Best American Sports Writing this past year. And the lengths to which he went to find the pieces that went in there. If every anthology editor worked this way, I think we would have a lot more surprising anthologies, and like illuminating anthologies, and ones that really gave you a sense of discovery. Like, the real joy of doing that kind of work, of recommending pieces to other people, is that you want it to be a place they've never heard of. Like you mentioned N+1, which is one of my like all-time favorite publications. They do such a good mix of things. And to me, there are so many publications that are so much smaller and more obscure that like we try to look for. But the notable inclusions in those anthologies is such a great place. It's like the second stop. Obviously you want to see what's in the anthology, but there are so many great things that come out of that appendix, that index.
Yeah, and I love when you see the guest editors' fingerprints on an anthology, because the fact that Melissa Phoebos is batting leadoff in that collection, in a sports writing collection, it just gives you an idea. Like, she writes in a voice-driven way, in a way that Hanif writes, and it's you can see the taste filtered through the editor to the thing. Whereas when Christopher McDougall edited the collection, surprise, surprise, there were some running stories in there, and right. When Howard Bryan edited it, there were some tennis things in there, and because he's really drawn to tennis, and you get a sense like, okay, these things aren't, objective. There is a subjectivity that's going on too, which can be on the one hand frustrating, but on the other hand, like really invigorating because you're like, oh, this is the year's best, but filtered through a certain prism.
Yep. And then that curator, that editor there's more authorial power vested in that position than you ever think of. But
Yeah.
as you said, like time and time again, these anthologies are a reflection of the tastes of the person who put it together. That is something that I know that for all these series, the editors take that job very, very seriously. And it also just goes to show that creating a surprising experience takes it takes work. You can't just be like, what are the 10 highest trafficked sports stories of the year? Like, what got people talking? If you went off that, let's not go down that road, but it really requires work because it's the quality of the story. And then it's also the subtext. Like, what gaps does this story fill? What voices does it come from or speak to? That, how do you create something that feels like a reflection of our entire world, not just the world of sports as it was dictated by beat writers for 60 years?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And given that, you've got a lot of original work going on with Longreads as well as this curatorial component, just how do you, just you personally, because everyone has their own methodology, just kind of break up your day so you are taking in some of the newer stuff and skimming the web for things that you want to recommend, while also, keeping your eye on the ball of the original content you have. Well, I hate that word content, but the original material you have coming through.
It's a necessary evil sometimes, right? Because peace doesn't always do it. It's tough for me to answer that question because I work not just on long reads, but I do a lot of internal stuff at Automattic. And I have some responsibilities that lie with the Atavist. And so my day isn't always as neat as saying, well, it's time to do some curation, and then I've got this long reads piece that I'm editing.
Yeah.
So I know that all the long reads editors sort of have a different answer to that question. For me, if I put myself in the situation of reacting, then I'll lose an entire day just because of the pings that are coming in and the other things that I will need to do. So when I have a piece, and I should also, as another caveat, I don't edit as much. Like, I'm not editing as many original stories as I would like to, just by virtue of my job and the time that I have. So I really try to reserve that. But when I've got something, I'm not naive enough to say I'm going to spend my day with this piece, because that doesn't happen. It can't happen. What I can say is, I know that because I'm on the West Coast, late afternoons tend to be my most productive time. It's when everything quiets down. I don't have any more meetings. I don't have any more calls. And so often I'll just wait it out because, like, if this wasn't borne out by repeated exposure to this phenomena, I would call it procrastination. But what I know very well about myself is, if I start working on something at 4, I'm going to get more done on it in the next 90 minutes to 2 hours than I would if I had set the whole day aside to do it. Because then by the time I got to 4 o'clock and I'd been meaning to do it, but all this other stuff had gotten in the way, I'd be completely demoralized. So now I go into it with the ability to focus on it and also the energy to focus on it. So as an editor, the afternoons are my time. My morning, it's just, I can't remember the last time I could use my morning for what you'd call creative work.
Yeah.
That goes for writing and for editing. And writing is something that I so rarely do at this point outside of the writing that I do for long reads. Like, writing as a working journalist is very rare indeed. But when that's on my plate, then it's the fear of the deadline.
Yeah.
When do I need to have this? What do I need to do on this? How much reporting does it entail? And then I'm much more likely to make a plan, because I can't think of the last time that I spent a month working on a story. But when that's the case, all bets are off. That's an all-consuming kind of enterprise.
I always love getting a sense of people who do a lot of editing. And then most of the people who listen to this show are writers, but also editors. We can always give ourselves the best shot at landing stories if we become more skilled self-editors. So for writers who want to be more critical of their work and the words they put on the page in the hopes of landing more work published, how would you counsel, writers to be better self-editors?
That's the $64,000 question, and I don't want to deprecate it by saying read your work out loud, right? Because it's
Right.
table stakes. Like if you don't already do that, then that, like that's
Right.
that's
Start there.
this one trick.
Yeah.
But for me, it is really about, and obviously the writing of a pitch and the writing of a draft are very, very different things, right? So let me put it on the draft of the story that you're actually writing. Sometimes it comes down to being merciless with yourself, by which I mean it's not kill your darlings. It's, is this bringing me through this piece? Is it bringing me through this argument? Is it bringing me through this story? When I was at Wired, I worked under a few different editors in chief there, but the last one was Nick Thompson, obviously, who is now CEO at The Atlantic and is an accomplished journalist in his own right. And at the time, I remember he would push back against stories with any sort of convoluted chronology. And if I was the writer of one of those pieces with a somewhat convoluted chronology, I was always like, man, why? Like, part of the art is hopping around. But I also wasn't being merciless with myself, right? I was allowing every long form writer wants their work to be sort of cinematic or arresting. There are a lot of impulses that we indulge that maybe aren't the best impulses for the piece because we're doing them. They're like the pyrotechnic side of things, right? It's the fun part of writing. It's like, let me do this thing.
Yeah.
Well, first
style
off,
components.
the style
points.
component. Like, first off, that thing has already been done, and it's already been done better. Let's not think that any of us are adding a new dimension to a wheel. And I love style. Don't get me wrong, but that style had better be adding something. Because if that style becomes obfuscatory, if that style gets in your way, if it slows down the propulsion of the story, or it stops the reader from being clear on characters or setting or what have you, then that's a net negative. Then we got to find a way to scale that back. And one thing that I think is endemic to writers, particularly writers, I'm putting myself in this group, any sort of writing with any sort of personal component or angle. Some people are allergic to putting themselves in their writing, which I think often can be good, but often you can adhere to that to the point of the detriment of the piece. Sometimes it needs a little bit of you. More often than not, it probably needs a little bit less of you. If we're talking at Longreads about a pitch, and that pitch is an essay, one of the things that is a hobby horse of mine is this there's no interiority to this piece. You're telling me everything. And obviously there's the show don't tell rule, but it's deeper than that. When a writer describes something as the way they see it, then you're putting distance between me and the experience. If you're writing what you see impressionistically, but you are not there, then I'm getting the sense of what it's like to walk through the world as you. And that's what you want for writing with a personal element. And so things that purport to be personal but feel arm's length, that I think is the trap that like the vast majority of personal writing can fall into. The more you can strip away and let the you just be the you that motivates the perspective rather than the you that narrates the perspective, that's where the power of personal writing, I think, really comes in.
Yeah, that's really rich. I have to really think on that. That's really astute. And it's like like leave a nice long pause in the podcast, let people just like think about that motivating component. And be like, everyone, like, take a beat, take a few breaths, and just listen to what Peter just said.
I don't know if it warrants all that, but it does. It is a. I don't know if there's even like a handy heuristic that you can apply when you go and you read your own work. But if it feels to you at all like you're telling us what you see, then just make it what the reader sees.
Yeah, and to your point of of style getting in the way, and then being able to somehow strip away from that and just not get in the way of it. I reread David Foster Wallace, one of the ultimate stylists, his essay on Michael Joyce, the tennis player who was like the number 100 in the world. It's probably a piece you've read. It's one I go to all the time. It's got my all-time really favorite kicker, and from the someone who can write a 300-word sentence, his kicker is 3 words, and it builds to it, and it's just this thing of the cards, the odds are so stacked against players who are so good as a Michael Joyce, but they can't break through the qualities, or if they do, they run into the buzzsaw of the best players in the world. And then just at the very end, after you feel all this despair for him, he just says, "Wish him well." And that is it. And it's the best kicker. It builds, and it's so tight from someone we don't associate tightness with. And he let his style get out of the way.
And you really nail something with that, which is this is really akin to like read your work out loud to yourself. But the reason that you do that is so you get away from anything that sounds rhythmically monotonous. And that mix up, that short, long thing, or if you're David Foster Wallace, that like huge disquisition and then a 3-word punch.
And a 3-syllable punch on top of that.
Whew, I mean, it's so arresting. And that's not style. I mean, it is, but it's what you're doing is you're letting the music of the music of the writing be the thing that affects people, not the fluidity of the phrasing. Right? Like adverbs, cut them down. We all know this. Like descriptive writing can get flowery fast. But when you think about the impact of writing as a rhythmic property rather than a descriptive one, you're really unlocking something. And like that is where the greats are. And if you can elicit that with the sparest writing, you can like when some like again with Hanif. And so I bring this up because a couple weeks ago we published the first of these essays. He's basically taking albums that he loved that never got like a huge critical assessment, and he's going back to them on their major anniversary. So what he did in his first essay was the major label debut of a rap group from North Carolina called Little Brother, and it was called The Minstrel Show. And what he does is he uses the minstrel performer or the vaudeville performer Burt Williams as like the spine of the piece. And there are these moments where the writing is just plain spoken to the point of minimalism, but the way that it hits you is like that's a masterclass in letting the rhythm and the honesty of the writing be the thing that affects people, not the whiz bang candy color Tom Wolfe cosplay hour.
Yeah.
Right? Like everybody does that at some point because it's fun. Yeah. But the more you can strip away and still put some punch behind your words, that is the stuff that becomes timeless.
Well, awesome. Well, tell me a bit about this membership drive you've got going for Longreads. Just what we can do to drive some attention there.
Yeah, so we have not done this in quite a while. Actually, I don't think we've done this in a concerted way since I joined in 2021. So really, Longreads has always been a bit of an NPR model. Give what you can. If you do, that's great. But everything, there are no ads, and you can read everything on the site. We have this. I mentioned our top 5 weekly newsletter before. This has such a vast audience, and so we're just trying to leverage that a little bit, and just it's really just sort of an appeal to the goodness of folks' heart. We know how valuable Longreads is to writers as well as to readers. We're just asking, in a world where people shell out for a Substack without a thought, to do the same for a place that has a small but mighty team. and publishes award-winning journalism of its own, and is the longest running, most consistent, most surprising recommendation engine in journalism.
Yeah, well, I can definitely vouch for everything that you guys are doing, especially in concert with the Atavist and everything. It's just like it's such a unique, singular experience, be it the Atavist or what Longreads has done and is doing, and to put a few bucks in there to keep it ad free, and so things aren't bombarding you, and you're not you can sink into a story in a way you can't with, let's just say, the New Yorker online. There's always a little video ad playing online and all that, and it's just there. You want to swat them away, and so yeah, throwing some bucks in the coffers of what you guys are doing just makes that possible and keeps the amazing work you're doing. Yeah, it gives it the momentum and the heft it needs and the altitude it needs.
Yeah, I appreciate
And
that.
deserves.
Thank you. And yeah, we, the Atavist and the Longreads are very much sister publications, right? And they have a sort of different model, right? Obviously anyone who listens to the podcast knows the Atavist well, but like those 10,000 words cinematic stories, that's an Atavist story. Longreads doesn't want to do those because like that is their siblings' bread and butter. We are doing a lot more reported work now than we have done. We're expanding our feature pipeline in that way. So, we have always essay reported and personal has been our stock and trade. We're building in more criticism and more feature reportage, and just really trying to be a more expansive but no less considered outlet.
Well, that's great. I've just always been such a fan of what you guys do, and it's very exciting to give some juice and have these kind of conversations with you and point people's work in that direction, point their eyeballs in that direction. But Peter, as I think I love bringing these conversations down for a landing by asking the guest for just a cool recommendation of some kind. So I would just extend that to you as we bring our conversation down for a landing.
I feel like I hear a lot of food recommendations on here, so I want to make sure not to ignore that. So a quick one on that front is, as a lifelong Dorito fanatic who understands that Doritos are maybe not the best thing you can put in your body, I have found popcorners, which are like, they look like Doritos and they're supposedly baked. It's not popcorners as a whole, but popcorners has a spicy queso flavor that I swear to you evokes the old quote taco flavor that you could find in like the late 80s and 90s. So if you miss like taco flavored chips, popcorn or spicy queso is a revelation. And then the other shout out I want to give is the other lifelong I have a bunch of them, but another lifelong obsession of mine beyond Doritos is word games. I've always done, crossword puzzles and word games and that. And a couple of years ago, obviously everyone knows the New York Times has gotten into this space in a huge way. So all those are great games. But there's an indie game designer named Zach Gage who always made incredible games for mobile. But he and a team launched something a couple of years ago called Puzzmo, which is now, it got bought by Hearst before it officially came out. So it can be syndicated. So maybe a newspaper you subscribe to has Puzzmo puzzles, but you can also just like join. And every day they've got like 10 different weird little games. And it's such a nice, and they think so deeply about what makes these enjoyable and what makes them a fun experience, either by yourself or with somebody. So it's one of those things that not enough people have heard of, but just brings me a ton of joy. So if you find yourself wishing that there was more to life than just Wordle and connections and I guess pips, then check out Puzzmo.
Oh, amazing. Well, Peter, I'm so glad we were able to have this conversation and talk about the arc of your editing career and your writing career and to date. And and just all the amazing stuff you're doing with Longreads. So just thanks so much for coming on and talking shop. This was awesome.
Absolutely agree. Thanks for having me on, Brendan. It was a blast.
Yes. Awesome. We did it. We did it again, didn't we? Pretty great, huh? Check out longreads.com to help them out. And you can also stay abreast about what Peter's up to on Instagram @ProvenSelf. Same goes for Bluesky. Be sure you're signed up with my long-running Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter and Pitch Club. Next issue of Pitch Club is going to feature a pitch letter to a literary agent. Oh, what? You just thought it was about pitching features? Fools! Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com or the embed form at brendanamero.com. All right, so the author subsidized book tour took me through Idaho from about October 3rd through the 8th. And I posted a few stupid videos on Instagram just about the author subsidized book tour and poking fun at that. Letting everybody know out there that authors on my level, we don't got money from the publisher. It is all out of pocket to do these things. And you see a lot of these authors with a bunch of dates, and you're like, how the fuck do they afford that? I don't know, but I'm telling you that it's hard to afford it, but I did it. It cost all told, this Idaho trip, about $1,000 out of pocket. That's food, that's lodging, that's fossil fuel, and cocaine. Due to weather, I slept in the back of my Crosstrek on night 1 in Caldwell, Idaho, which is about an 8-hour drive from Eugene. It was a good, ambitious day 1 of driving, which was suboptimal, we will say. I had a shitty air mattress, though it's an air mattress that is like basically form-fitted for the back of a Crosstrek. But I can't say it was one of my best moves. I should have opened up my tent box. I have an iCamper X-Cover 3.0 or some shit, and then dealt with the moisture management later the next day. I should have done that. I did not, and it was not comfortable. My next nights were in Ketchum for Legends Never Die, Ultramarathon, the bib pickup, and then I was at the finish line for most of the day out at Oregon Gulch Trailhead, just north of Ketchum. And that was pretty cool. And I stayed at an RV park just south of Ketchum, the Meadows. And it was a nice flat pad for me to unfold the tent, but it was cold as fuck. One night it dropped to 27 degrees. That was chilly. And you definitely don't want to get up and have to go use the restroom when it's in the 20s. But with all the windows closed in my tent and my winter sleeping bag, I was comfortable. My neighbors in the RV site beside me saw me the next day and wondered if I had lost consciousness that night. But nope, that was just the beer. And holy shit, dig this. So I had about 60 books in my backseat. I over-ordered for various events, and I'm in the hole for a lot of front runners. I told my neighbor at the RV park that I was in Idaho doing book events, and he asked me what I wrote, and I told him I wrote The Front Runner about Steve Prefontaine. Turns out this guy had run in Prefontaine Classics in the 5,000 and 10,000 meters, and he played, get this, Emil Putemans in Without Limits, who's a Belgian Olympian. And this is the Prefontaine movie starring Billy Crudup. Wild. And the guy was like, I'll be sure to buy your book. And you know what I did? This is how savvy writers are. I went into my car, and I grabbed my fucking business card and said, check out this website to buy a copy. I had 60 fucking books in the back seat. Did I just clip my audio? I think I did. 60 fucking books in the back seat I could have signed, stamped, and sold them one. Right there. What the actual fuck is wrong with me? Coffee is for closers. I pulled out of my parking spot because I was leaving. I was packing up everything, and I realized it would be weird to circle back and say, oh, hey, by the way, I have a bookstore in my back seat. Stupid fuck. Me, not the guy who played Emil Putemans. Oh, boy. So from Ketchum, went to Boise, and thankfully I have a best bud in Kim H. Cross, who let me crash in her guest room for 3 nights. It was the first time Kim and I had met in person, which is bonkers. But that's kind of the intimacy and bond this podcast has afforded me, where I feel a real deep kinship with a good chunk of the people who have come on the show. I owe so much to Kim. The Front Runner doesn't happen without her, like literally. She made the introduction to my current agent, which led to the Front Runner. She orchestrated this entire Idaho book swing, 4 events total, 2 in Ketchum, 2 in Boise. And her community, which is largely a lot of mountain biking, people, really came out for the kicker at the Lit Room at Old Speak Book Bar on the final night. The Fleet Feet one, only like one person showed up, which, I was kind of licking my wounds. Like, only 7 people RSVP'd. I'm like, oh, that sucks. But then 6 fewer than 7 showed up. So that's what happens on the author-subsidized book tour. But at Old Speak, at the Lit Room, people showed up. It was great. It was an electric event in one of the coolest new bookstores in the country. I believe they sold all the copies of The Frontrunner. Chelsea is doing some pitch-perfect work there. But what I missed most about my time in Boise was having a co-working pal in Kim for a couple days. I was there for nearly 3 full days, which is kind of a lot. And maybe I overstayed my welcome, but it's such as it was. That's what happened. And after she unilaterally kicked my ass on the mountain biking trails on the Sunday I arrived there, Sunday afternoon, we spent our mornings and afternoons just working on our work. I was doing some proofreading work and podcast work, etc. And she was up in her office upstairs working on travel arrangements for things and writing and reporting. And she'd come down for a snack and we'd shoot the shit. And she'd go back upstairs to work and I'd keep doing my thing. And I don't know what to say except that as freelancers, we're so often holed up and alone. We're such weird feral cats that we're unhireable. I'm 0 for this decade in job applications. I don't even get acknowledgments, which is all the more depressing. So it was like having an office mate. And we'd chat on a coffee break or a protein shake break. And then maybe we'd go for a bike ride, or if it was, and it was really cool because we're in the same lane of narrative nonfiction. So we can just kind of talk through what we were maybe stumbling with or struggling with. And when I got home to Eugene, I was kind of in a funk because it's not unlike when you come back from a conference and you're buzzing from being all around your people. But then you soon settle into the well-worn grooves of home and the buzz wears off and you kind of mourn being around people who fundamentally get you. Plus, Kim did so much for me and wants the best for me even when I don't feel like I deserve it. So all I can say was that it was a special time. And I'm deeply grateful and lucky to have people like Kim in my life, like Ruby McConnell and my lady wife, all who see something in me that I unilaterally am blind to. Why? That's for therapy. But there's also the creeping specter of the clock. I'm 45. These self-limiting beliefs have perhaps wasted a good 10 years of potential growth, certainly in my professional years. Maybe I've wasted more time because from an early age, being self-deprecating was very validating because I got a lot of laughs. And then you tell these self-deprecating things over and over again, and maybe you write them over and over again in your journals, and you start to believe them. And that's what's happened to me for decades. I've said this before, but I live in fear of future regrets. And I have visions of me on my deathbed lamenting why I wasted so much time and energy on bullshit, assuming I get to a deathbed and I don't get T-boned by a car today when I go pick up the final CSA veggie box. I won't be upset if I die having, say, written 9 books and not 12. Whatever. So long as I gave it my all. But I will have regrets if I drag my feet and decide to not go all in for fear of failure or for want of comfort. Netflix and chilling without the chilling. Drinking myself into a nail-biting stupor. Not going to that conference. Living vicariously through avatars of accomplishment on TV and social media. I already mourn for having wasted my 30s. And yeah, maybe you can say that set the table for what's happening now or what's going to happen, but I think I hid in plain sight. Instead of working on what mattered, I took menial jobs that robbed me of my purported vision and visions. Even my early 40s, sucked into the vortex of a pandemic, feel somewhat wasted, and maybe I need to throw some grace at that situation that I haven't fully recovered from it. And in that 5-year span, of course, the Frontrunner happened and the podcast became a bit more popular than it was. I can only hope that that keeps going. I'm sure there are many of us who can feel the weight of future regrets, not to mention the ones that we're saddled with from our past. So I don't know. Go on. Text that crush. Start a podcast. Start a YouTube channel. Fail spectacularly. Try something new. Try to have fun. I don't know what that is. Give yourself credit. I don't know what that is. Forgive a past version of yourself. Can't do that. Take a nap. I could do that. Run that race. Swim the channel. So I don't know. Stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do, interview. See ya.